Hi, it's Jeannie with Nebraskans for Founders Values, and we're going to do a little Nebraska history lesson, which I'm sure you weren't taught about this in school. And this goes back to addressing when Nebraska switched from the legislature meeting biennial meetings versus annual meetings. And I got onto this whole subject back in the 108th legislature when Senator Steve Erdman, introduced his last bill, and this addressed changing the legislature to meet biennial and not annual. And his bill that he proposed was LR 281CA, and it was a constitutional amendment to provide for biennial legislative sessions to begin in 2027. And so this brings up, when I prepared to speak on this particular hearing, just did a little bit of research and found documentation that I thought was quite fascinating. So it took me back to Legislative Bill 992, and this goes way back in the archives from January 30th, 1976. There was some legislation introduced by Mahoney for the governor, and the governor at the time, I thought that was kind of important, was James Exon, and he was quite an interesting guy. So a little back history on him, and this is just coming out of Wikipedia. He was the governor of Nebraska from 1971 to 1979, and he vetoed 141 bills in his final 7 years as governor, or an average of 20 a year. And Exon was opposed to gay rights. As a candidate for governor, he voiced his opposition to homophile studies, a class at the University of Nebraska taught by Lewis Crompton. So I thought that was very interesting. The main thing I wanted to point out is he vetoed a lot of bills. So that was, we don't really see that much, but that's what he did. So then we go back to what Mahoney submitted on behalf of him and the governor. So the statement of intent for LB 992 that was introduced in 1976, it would allow the people of the state of Nebraska to vote on a constitutional amendment to return the legislature to biennial sessions with a 120-day limitation. The legislature has been meeting annually for 6 years, and this bill would allow the people an opportunity to express their desire to either maintain the annual sessions or return to biennial sessions. And this is signed by Eugene Mahoney for the governor. So then it goes on and reads and dictates the minutes. And I want to read to you what Senator Eugene Mahoney says. So this is February 13th, 1976. It's a hearing on LB 992 and LB 835. The Committee on Constitutional Revision and Recreation met on February 13th, 1976 at 1:30 p.m. in the Supreme Court hearing room for the purpose of holding a public hearing on LB 992 and LB 835. So they start out the hearing, and then Senator Mahoney gets up and speaks, and here is his testimony. This is a great honor to appear before this committee 2 days in a row. I am here representing the governor on LB 992, but I would say that I am here representing myself too. In a few minutes, you will have the opportunity to hear from lawyer Lutke, who will be most eloquent in opposition to this same point. This is an old battle between Senator Lutke and myself. I, not being a professional legislator, and Senator Lutke being one. LB 992 is as simple as asking that the wisdom of this committee allow this bill to be put on the floor of the legislature, and if the legislators themselves, in their good wisdom, let the people vote in the fall or the spring. If you should so choose, a constitutional amendment to let the population of Nebraska, the voters, decide after they have had now 4 years of experimenting with the annual sessions. 1969, I believe Senator Sayas was the last of the biennial sessions, and I am correct in that. That was about the time we had the last one. We had one session, of course, that ran. Senator Lutke is going to use it. It is part of his case. Went to September 23rd or 26th, but in those days, we allowed the farmer senators to go home and plant the corn and take a week off now and then. 4th of July, we would take off a couple of weeks. We would only work from Tuesday to Thursday because the airplane at Scottsbluff was always gone from Thursday night till Monday night. No major legislation ever took place Friday or Monday. We were a 3-day-a-week legislature. You can't blame that on every 2-year legislature. We just didn't get down to the bills that we do now, where we are all here on a Friday afternoon. It was a long day in hell when Gene Mahoney was here on a Friday afternoon. This and Senator Lutke will come up and say, that is the very thing that we need. We have got to have this done in this manner where we have efficiency. But that is not always good law either, or fast bill passing when everybody is hyper and up and tense and people are snipping and snapping at each other because every one of us is under pressure. I don't think any one of you have ever had an opportunity to actually have lunch. I have people chasing me in my office at 12:30 and 1 o'clock. I just barely got here at 1:30 to get through this with what we had. Enough of that. The question is that the people in Nebraska ought to have an opportunity, after seeing this thing for 4 years, to place on the ballot the question of returning this legislature back. And why do I say this? First of all, Nebraska is a small state. We don't have a big population. We have a one-body legislature, unique. We could be in session and hold a 10-bill limit if that is what you wanted, and handle all the business before the legislature and probably get out somewhere around mid-June or 1st of July and have had enough time to deliberate that legislation without rushing. And in the present terms, it is a catastrophe. It is chaos. The legislators themselves are never going to put any iron rules through that are going to say we are only going to allow you 5 bills. The committees are only going to allow 5. That would be the greatest debate that ever took its course. It would just never be done by the legislature. It was hard enough to put a 10-bill limit. I didn't put any bills in, but I wouldn't want to see any limit in the first place. I think if you have got bills and got the adrenal glands to handle them and the blood that flows and you like to put in a lot of bills, then that should be your privilege. The last of the long sessions, which I mentioned to you before, which was in 1969, there was no bill limit. Consequently, you only had a lot of bills coming through all of the time. I do feel that if we would have permission back from the population, from the voters in Nebraska, to return to the every 2-year session, that this is a wise course for Nebraska with a small population, and also from the fact that we have a unique legislature in a one-house body. Man or beast is not safe when this legislature is in session. That is quite a statement. I say that because we ourselves come up with every darn kind of legislation that can be dreamed up. We are in 49 different directions, being policemen in every sense of the word. We are not the firemen, the good guy that comes out with the rescue squad and takes the victim to the hospital or puts out the fires. We're constantly thinking up 10 different ways that either we are taxing people, restricting people, changing laws, and therefore we get into the sense of the word that we ourselves believe that we have got to be in the session every year. We don't have to be in session every year. This is because the people gave us an experiment. We tried it and it is not working. We should go back to sense and sensibility and return this legislation back to an every 2-year session. We don't need professional legislators. We need to let the people decide this for us. And what is wrong with placing this on the ballot and seeing how popular in a popularity poll we all are? We individually all think that we are great in our own right, but if this is ever put on the ballot, mark my words, the people will say with a resounding vote that this legislature should go back to the other. Now I will just end it quickly saying I have served 10 of my years under the old 2-year system, and I have served 4 of these years under this system, and this is chaos. This is chaotic, and we ought to return back so that the people will have some protection of knowing that we are only back here every 2 years. Wow, isn't that just amazing? I find that just resounding with what we've been experiencing with the legislature and all these bills that get introduced. Now, a little bit of history on if this has been tried to get changed over the past decades. And so previous introduced legislation to return to a biennial sessions was introduced, of course, in this one in 1976. Again, in 1979, LB 151, it advanced to general file with amendments, and then it didn't go anywhere. Then you had LR 4CA in 1985. It was indefinitely postponed. In 1986, brought back again. LR 304CA, indefinitely postponed. In 2011, LR 44CA, again, indefinitely postponed. So there's some people that don't want to go back to a biennial legislative session, but there's a lot of merit in what Senator Mahoney put in his testimony in 1976.